Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and welcome from Columbus, Ohio, in the Northern Hemisphere, sitting there on a Thursday evening. Amy Franko, welcome to the podcast.
It is great to be here. Thursday evening for me, a Friday morning for you, and opposite parts of the world. I love that we get to connect and we live in completely different parts of the world. It's great to be here.
It's fascinating, isn't it? That one thing that came out of COVID, even though Zoom was around before that, the ability to be able to talk to people on the opposite side of the world without having to travel, and it looks like we're just in the same room.
I know, exactly. And a little side note about me, I'm taking Spanish lessons right now. I'm learning Spanish, and I'm taking classes from a school in Guatemala, and we do all of our classes. It's private instruction, and it's all on Teams. And I don't think had COVID happened that the school would have even done that.
No, which is really interesting from a selling context, given that we're here to talk about sales and sales leadership. But from a market point of view, a lot of organizations, particularly if they've been wanting to grow into the international space, all of a sudden more markets open up because we've now got this technology that we can get access to potential customers and customers through Teams or Zoom or whatever other video conferencing tools that are available. So it's interesting.
Right, it sure is. And I see with some of my clients, and from a leadership standpoint, it's attracting talent from other parts of the world or other parts of the country.
Yeah.
And so that creates different challenges, different opportunities from a leadership standpoint, whether it's sales or other types of leadership, because now the pool for everything is a lot wider.
It is. I was thinking back. I used to be in corporate and worked for one of the bigger telecommunications companies here in Australia, and back in the day, before Zoom and before Teams and before video that was, one-to-one, we had to go into the big Cisco telepresence or teleconference center, which was a big studio literally set up, and you had all these massive screens, which was really cool. But now you think, well, I'm just thinking back now, the technology that we're now using, the video quality and the internet and the speed, it's just as good as what we're experiencing. In fact, in some cases, better to what we're experiencing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Unbelievable. So Amy Franko and Associates, or is it Amy Franko Associates? Because I sometimes put "and Associates" in there. Sales and growth strategist.
I answer to either one. Amy Franko Associates technically, but I answer to either one.
Nah, awesome. So sales and growth strategist, keynote speaker, author, and you've got the wonderful book there behind you on your right shoulder called The Modern Seller, which we'll talk about as well. Also the purveyor of the Strategic Selling Academy suite, specializing in B2B sales strategy. So, hey, I think you're on the right podcast.
I think so. I'm glad that we found each other and we have common connections and professional colleagues.
Well, and we were just talking before we press record how things happen and how connections are made, and a really good lesson for people in sales as well, that you just don't know who you are going to be connected with through the connections that you make, either inbound or in many cases outbound. And I'm always a believer that the people are placed in your path for a very specific reason, and things happen for that reason if you're open to it. But it's just interesting because we've come together through a mutual colleague, Ruth Milligan, who was on the podcast, and you also mentioned Barbara Weaver-Smith as well, who's been on the podcast last year as well. So it's a small world.
It is a small world. It's a big, small world, isn't it?
It is. It is. So before we jump into this, because I'd love to talk to you about a number of topics around sales and sales leadership, and particularly one that I haven't spoken about for a while now, and that is self-leadership. I love your perspective on that. But for the audience, can you just give us a bit of a background? I always like to delve into the background of my guests, because when you think about selling, not many people, well, certainly not many people I've come across, get into high school or middle school or think, yeah, I want to be a salesperson. Where can I go to university to learn sales?
Right. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
On that topic, That's an interesting point because at least here in the States, and I'm not sure if this is true of where you are in Australia, but there are more and more universities that have sales programs or at least sales certifications
Mm,
for college students who have an interest and an aptitude that they can actually study this as a discipline. That's something that just wasn't available, when I was going through university and getting my first job,
yeah.
getting my first professional job. Um, but I got my start. See where to begin. I got my professional start in an inside sales role. So I
Okay.
worked for a technology company, got my professional start in an inside sales role. And for the first 10 years of my professional career, I was in the technology space. So for the vast majority of that first stretch of my career, I worked for companies like IBM and Lenovo, and I was in a variety of sales roles and a
Hmm.
quota carrying salesperson. And I absolutely loved what I did. I sold personal computing hardware, and I sold to a variety of different types of customers. I had large enterprise, I had small business, I had public sector, and I really loved the variety of that work. I always believed that I would either start something or lead something. So
Hmm.
I'm definitely in the right place for this conversation. And I went down the path of starting something. And when I was in my early 30s, I took a pivot into entrepreneurship, started my own organization, which focused at the time specifically in leader and learning and development. And over time and our careers morph and change and the paths that we take change, I decided to take learning and development and everything I loved about sales and sales leadership, and I have since combined that into one organization where I now get to work with CEOs, with sales leaders on everything from sales strategy to skill development, to all the structures that support a sales organization's success. And I'm fortunate enough to work in a variety of industries. So I get to work in professional services. I have clients in the manufacturing sector, and then a couple of other like interesting outlying sectors. But I would say those in technology, those are probably the places where I spend the most time these days.
Nice, nice. So you mentioned before that there was like a pivot, a moment where you could continue to work for a large organization like Novo or IBM, but you chose to work for yourself. I'd love to know what was happening at that time. Was there a specific moment that said, you know what, I don't want to work for a big corporate anymore. I want to be the, I guess, for want of a better term, the master of my own destiny? Or was there something else that had been gnawing away at you for a while that just led you naturally down to that path?
I would say it's probably something that naturally led me down the path. I I'm the oldest of five. I have four younger sisters, and there's a 10-year age difference between me and my youngest sister. And so I think I've always been that natural leader. You probably need to have them on the podcast to hear all the stories about us growing up. But but I think I've always had that leadership in my DNA. And like you just never know where the path is going to take you. But I always knew in my heart that I would either start something or lead something. And I absolutely loved my time working at IBM and Lenovo and in the different tech organizations that I got to be a part of. But I also knew I wanted to take a chance in doing something on my own.
Mm.
So it was partially, I knew at some point that would be my path, but then I'll call it a catalyst presented itself. And I had the opportunity to leave Lenovo at the time and take this pivot into learning and development, and start up my own organization and start working with some clients in that space. So it was a little bit of opportunity, timing, always knowing that I would do something like that. But interestingly enough, like I intentionally like resigned my job. I'd had a couple good sales years, so I was able to put away a few good commission checks. And there was nothing more nerve wracking than calling up your boss and quitting your job, right?
Yeah,
Like the decision isn't made for you. I made the decision, and I have a lot of support from my husband, who's like, what's the worst thing that can happen?
yeah,
It doesn't work out, and you go get another sales job. Sales is the best career, and I'm so glad that I'm in it and I do
yeah.
what I do. But it's a lot of what's the worst thing that could happen? And would you rather look back and say, oh, I wish I would have stayed in my corporate role? Or would you rather look back and say that at least even if it didn't work out, that I at least gave it a try?
Which is a great lesson in sales because you have to be resourceful. And resourcefulness is really important because well, you don't know necessarily where your next opportunity is going to come from, but you need to be in the game and be open to where maybe some of the signals which may lead to an opportunity. Rather than waiting. And there are a lot of salespeople, and you probably see this in the States as well. There are a lot of salespeople who are literally waiting for the leads to come to them, to be handed from maybe the marketing department to say, "Hey, yes, the leads go and have a conversation."
Very true.
Yeah.
Yes, I see that very often.
Mm. And so, moving into learning and development, when you were in that particular phase, did you go straight into, I guess, the flavor of sales, or was there other things that you were doing in relation to the learning and development space when you went out on your own?
That's a great question. And it was actually other things in relation to the learning and development space. I'd somewhat taken a sharp left turn out of sales to get into this entrepreneurial role. And there was a good stretch of time, maybe 5 to 7 years, where my company did all custom learning and development. It wasn't just specific to sales.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that for a stretch of time. But after about, let's call it 6 or 7 years, I started to feel the burnout of doing that work and the burnout of leading teams. And it really, in the end, wasn't quite the calling that I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And as I reflected on, well, what do I love to do? What's the work that I really enjoy? I love everything sales. I love working with clients. I love the leadership aspects of it. It's like, well, why am I not doing that? And let's make some changes, because I was the person who was running the business and I wasn't super happy running the business, and I'm the person in charge, so the only person who can change it is me, right? And that took a couple of years. So for anybody who's watching or listening that wonders, like, you make a decision and how long does it actually take from the time you make the decision to experiencing the decision?
Yeah.
It can take time and patience. And it
Yeah.
probably took a good, I'd say 2 to 3 years after I made that decision for things to really be at a place in a clip in the
Mm.
sales arena that I
Yeah.
had been doing previously. So patience, persistence, sticking with it, that resourcefulness becomes really critical.
And underneath all of that, there was the itch that just needed to be scratched. And it has its way of coming back to the surface.
Yeah, I love everything sales. I feel like I've gotten it. I couldn't have landed in a better career. And to your earlier point, it's not a career path. It's more of a career path now, I would say, for
Yeah.
people that want to do this work. Maybe they're in a business school at college or university. But I kind of fell into it, and I think I fell into the absolute best career for me. And I think no matter what role you have in an organization, there is a sales element to it.
Well, that's interesting you say that, Amy, because every person I speak to or workshops I do, and there's people who are not in a sales role, but they're in a leadership or an influencing role. I always have the same conversation with them and I ask them as a precursor to this conversation, who loves to be in sales and what do you think about sales and who loves to be sold to? And it's very rare that anybody puts their hand up and says, "Hey, I love sales. I love to be sold to." Most of them have this, "Oh my God, when there's a salesperson in the room, just look out. Keep your hands in your pockets because they're going to try and grab something from you." But when they understand that everybody's in sales and sales at the end of the day is problem solving and service and it's helping, then all of a sudden there's a not so much a what's the term? A reframe that
Mhm.
they have a different perspective. So if you're having a conversation, you're helping somebody, you are selling to them, right? And that is an ethical thing. So the term ethics and sales doesn't necessarily go hand in hand for most people, but that's exactly what it is.
I have that conversation a lot with many of my clients, but especially my clients that are in professional services. Because in professional services, at least in my experience with the clients I work with, they are not traditional sales teams that
Mm,
have a territory or sales quotas or what have you. So there is that shift, that mindset that has to shift to understand and reframe what sales means. So we have a lot of those conversations. And once we reframe that a bit, it's like, okay, it takes time for that to be integrated. It's not
Yeah.
going to be an overnight mindset shift, but it does open people up to say, maybe I can think about this differently. And if I think about sales as I'm helping my clients and prospects make the best decisions that they can about their business,
Mm,
that's an entirely different way of thinking.
totally.
And that's what helps me to stay in the game.
Yeah. Love it. Which is a great segue to this topic I'd love to explore with you around self-leadership. And you would have, in your own experience, moving from Lenovo into your own organization, that would have had to have been something to really focus on because, as John Maxwell says, you can't lead others until you learn how to lead yourself and lead yourself effectively. And sometimes the biggest challenge is the person just staring back at you in the mirror.
Truth.
So,
Yes.
I know you do a lot of work in this space with your clients. So let's talk about self-leadership. And firstly, the definition of self-leadership when it comes to sales.
Interestingly enough, you're also an entrepreneur, so you'll probably appreciate this. So you talked earlier about having to just be out in the marketplace, and your thought leadership and your presence is required out in the marketplace, as is proactively reaching out to your clients and prospects. So the most popular blog of all time on my website, without trying, is my self-leadership blog. 15 plus years later,
Yeah.
that is the most popular blog on my website. And it's just one of those things that took off on its own. And so for me, as I think about what it means to be a self-leader, I believe it's the intentional choice that we make to really lead our own lives. And that gets reflected into how we lead others. Now, we'll of course talk about it in the realm of sales, but that could be for anything. It could be in your community, it could be in your company, it could be in your family. But the choices that we make about ourselves and the way we lead ourselves get reflected into how we lead others. And ultimately, it's a combination of that intention that lets us create impact. But it
Yeah.
all has to start with ourselves first.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And people that are listening to this, there might be some that say, but you don't understand, Darren and Amy, we are operating in a really competitive environment. I've got a sales manager or a director of sales or a chief revenue officer that is just hammering me to make more calls, make more conversion opportunities, deliver more results. I don't have time to self-lead because I'm always caught up in the doing, the doing, the doing, right? But
Yeah.
in order to be able to do something really well, you first of all have to know who you need to be in order to do something really well. So it always starts with us.
Yes. And I don't know about you, but there is no client or prospect I speak to that says things are really easy and we don't work in a competitive environment, or there aren't disruptions happening out in the world. Like there's nobody that I talk to that says that. Um, Probably the other little bit of myth busting that I do with clients, and this could be if I'm talking to a CEO or somebody who's just walked in the door
Mm,
on their first day, that leadership truly isn't about the title on the business card. It's really about you and how you show up.
mm,
But the little bit of myth busting that I like to do, especially with your scenario that you just described, because I think that happens so often. I'm doing. How do I create the space to think about how I want to be? And that doesn't have to be done in really big pockets of time.
yeah.
If you can make small changes and open up just a little bit of space, you'll start to see some of that progress. Or even if it's saying I have to make call after call after call, well, can we take a pause and think about the calls that we're making
Mm,
and make an adjustment in that specific scenario
yeah.
versus feeling like you have to change all of these things at once.
Mm. Well, often the people who are in that sort of scenario think it's the technique. And when you look at results. Often people are looking at the results and saying either we're getting the results we want or we don't get the results we want. And so they take one step back and ask, what are you doing in order to get that result or not that result? And if you're not getting the result, then change the way you're doing something. But to your point, they don't go back another step or another couple of steps and say, hang on, what is going inside your head leading up to the moment you're taking that action that is leading to that result that perhaps you don't want? So the reflection time becomes critically important. And it's something that I talk to leaders all the time. And interestingly, I could count on one hand the number of leaders, even over the last 12 months, who have religiously, with discipline, sat down once a week and actually had thinking time where they're free of distractions so they could just reflect on how have I been this week? What have I achieved this week? What's worked? What hasn't worked? So that I can be more intentional, excuse me, with what I'm going to do next week. Now you can do that on a macro
Wow.
scale, you can do it on a micro scale, right? But that's my view, that's self-leadership.
Yeah. And that's really interesting that you say that, like because how few CEOs or leaders are doing that. And a lot of times it's not so much, sometimes we don't know what to do, but many times we do know what to do. And your word discipline is really, that always really resonates with me because it is the discipline to create the space for yourself to do
Mm,
that.
yeah.
I get asked a lot the question, I don't know if you get asked this question, but like, what's the difference between motivation and discipline? What's better, motivation or discipline? And you get into this kind of philosophical discussion about which one's better, which one do you need? And I believe that like I'm a very like self-driven, motivated person, but even having that, it's discipline
That's it.
that actually helps me to be successful because discipline will help you to do the things even sometimes on the days that you don't want to do it.
There it
And
is.
then you'll look back and you'll say, you know, I'm really glad that I made the choice to be disciplined to do it.
That's it. It's you and I are exactly on the same page here because there are, and even leaders, even sales leaders saying, oh, one of the key responsibilities for me as a sales leader is I've got to keep constantly motivating my team. I said, why? Why are you doing that? So if you think about it, if you're trying to motivate your team are now being taught that in order for them to be quote unquote effective, they need you in order to wind them up so they can let go, right? And I made this mistake back in the day when I was running a sales team in a big corporate, and Monday morning motivation sessions was the theme of the day. And I'd prepare all weekend. I'd have this great session. That'd be all around the boardroom table. They'd have their laptops open. I'm thinking to myself, they are listening intently, writing copious amounts of notes. No, no. They were looking at emails. They were looking at LinkedIn. They maybe, if they felt good, updating the CRM. They weren't listening to me at all. So the discipline part is critical because the discipline and sometimes doing the things that you don't want to do, but you know that it's going to lead to a result, is what actually creates the motivation.
And going back to when you asked the question, when the comments made, I need to motivate my team or I can't motivate my team, the why question, well, why are you doing that?
Mm,
And almost always when you ask a question like that, you'll get some kind of pause that says, that's a really good question. Why am I doing that? And that's that's an indicator to take some space to think about the why.
totally.
Yeah, I is someone, you know, you and I are both in the realm of consulting and skill development. And I'm a big believer in having our own mentors and coaches that help us to be better. So I have somebody that I work with, and one of the real aha moments that he shared with me was the idea that as a consultant from the outside, he's like, you know what? It's not your role to hold those sales teams accountable.
Mm,
It is the managers and the leaders' role. And you actually overstep your bounds when you hold that team accountable
yeah,
because it's their role to do that. And as I let that sink in, that was really freeing. That was really freeing, as you know, because the intention was I want them to be successful.
mm,
But to your point about motivation and discipline, they have to make the choice to want that.
Yeah,
And it's the manager, the management and the leadership that has to create the environment for it.
totally. And as you said through all that, it's really important for leaders to understand that sometimes the responsibility of a leader, particularly in sales, is to do things despite how they feel because it's the right thing to do. And in order to do that, it takes discipline because it says, you know what, I don't really want to get up this morning to go to the gym, or I don't want to get up and do that thing that I've committed to doing, but not really feeling like it today. Well, the exceptional sales leader or the exceptional human being who self leads is saying, no, despite how I feel, I'm going to do that because I know that if I take action, then there'll be a lag effect. And maybe through that, I'll be inspired, I'll be motivated, I'll be energized because I'm taking action. And that's the satisfaction you get by being a disciplined person.
And there's the balance point, right? Where, like, back to your earlier example with the person who says, I'm doing the call after call after call. I don't have the time to reflect or to do this.
Yeah.
There is that balance point that says, am I doing too many things, or am I taking action that isn't like purposeful or intentional? And do I need to take a pause to
Mm.
really reflect on this so that I'm actually having better action and better result in the future? So there is that balancing point of doing and not allowing that to happen too.
Yeah. You still got to do stuff, right? Because
Right.
what we're not saying is you can't just be like the Zen master and just be for 7 hours a day and not get anything done because at the end of the day, the results have to be delivered.
And I'm so glad that you made the results comment, because of many of the conversations I have with leaders, when we talk about results, what are the actual real results that you're looking to accomplish?
Mm.
One of the things that I see often is many firms are chasing too many results and too many metrics,
Yeah.
and therefore the meaning, uh, you lose focus. The meaning isn't quite there. The focus gets diffused, and now teams don't really know, or they're not invested in what it
Yeah.
is that they are working toward.
Yeah. So the message there is don't be too overburdened with too many metrics to appease too many leaders or too many
Mm-hmm.
masters, if you like. Um,
Right.
so back on the self-leadership stuff, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important, particularly for sales leaders listening to this, because they're the ones that are the barometers for the team and they're the ones that people are looking to as models to follow. So it's really important. They're really clear. Um, it's fair to say that times right now, Amy, is probably the same in the States that it is in Australia. It's fairly uncertain, right? Not that there's really been any time in the last 5, 10 years where there's been certain times. So this is just
True.
the new normal. Um,
Right.
but can you just talk through some of the thoughts you've got on whether it's techniques or approaches or thought patterns that can help people develop this concept of self-leadership? Because when people hear that term, because you throw out the thing leadership, you want to be a great leader, right? It's not often that somebody can really clearly articulate, well, what does that actually mean? Or give thought to what that actually means. They just think, well, leadership means I'm going to tell people what to do. Leadership means I've got a title, therefore people will follow me because of the status that's associated with that, right? So when you're talking with sales leaders, when you're talking with their sales teams and running programs and coaching them, and we talk about this thing called self-leadership, what are some tangible things that people can think about to implement to improve that concept of self-leadership?
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, as you were asking me that question, I'm thinking about a recent engagement that I did with a client, a really big financial services organization, and I was working with one sales leadership team. And the request from the leader, the executive leader of this team, was, you know, I have this team of, it's like 6 or 8 really, really sharp, accomplished sales leaders. They have really big goals and quotas. They have big teams that they lead. And I want to bring them together to have a conversation about leadership and leadership presence. And the specific request was, I don't want another training. I don't want another set of tactics and techniques. What can we do that's a little bit different? which I thought was a really unique and interesting challenge. And so what we came up with, and this can give something tangible to somebody
Mm,
watching or listening on how they might approach this with themselves or with their teams, is I created with them a 2-hour roundtable conversation. And I organized it around 4 pillars of leadership presence or self leadership. And the 4 pillars were acumen, communication, vitality, and impact.
mm,
And instead of prescribing a lot of tactics and techniques, I brought some questions to prompt conversation. And this is something that a leader can do. This is something that an individual can do with themselves, is to have, and I can share these so that they can be part of the show notes here. But to have some reflection questions to give you an opportunity to just slow things down a little bit,
mm,
because things are so turbulent, because things are changing daily, multiple times a day, because we live in just this always on world. Just a little bit of that pause to take some time to reflect can often be a really great catalyst for building your self leadership habits and your self leadership discipline. So that was something tangible I was able to do with the leadership team to frame things up, and we can certainly go into each of these pillars if you'd like. But to frame things up and to just slow things down
mm.
for a conversation. And that was a lot more refreshing and I think impactful than having another formal training. And then as part of that, I also spent time with each of those leaders on an individual basis where we talked about things that were specifically happening with them, with their teams, to help them give some integration and some
Mm.
practical application to it.
That's it. That's awesome because it wouldn't be too often that a senior leadership team would give themselves the permission to not do just tactical training because they're focused on the doing, because they're focused on the results, but to step back and really think about and analyze and reflect on, how are we going in terms of our impact? Do we have and have we maintained vitality of ourselves, but also our team? Are we giving people space to go and do some yoga or some Pilates or whatever it happens to be to enable that vitality to happen? But then things like communication as well is a really important thing. And from the acumen perspective, it's are we having legitimate, authentic, and that word authentic is thrown around far too much these days, but real conversations. And am I using my intelligence, my emotional intelligence, to actually read what's happening in the world or in the environment,
Mm-hmm.
in my world? So how did they respond to that? Because I'm always interested in terms of, rather than doing a training and you teach them a technique and they go away and they might get the results, they might use it for 30 days, or they take their workbook and put it in the drawer and never see it again. What was the outcome of that in terms of, was there a tangible change that, they grabbed hold of a thread and now they're paying that forward and it's having a long lasting impact?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why this senior leader had made the request to spend time with the team was the ability. These are people that are all over the place. So to our earlier conversation, people are all over the country and leading teams, nationally and internationally. The ability to come together and have collaborative conversation. We don't collaborate and share enough
Mm,
with each other and amongst our teams. So that was also one of the underpinnings of spending time with this leadership team. What they uncovered through the conversation was, what I appreciated was that they came prepared. So I did have a little bit of pre-work where there were some reflection questions. There was a very brief survey, but each one of them came prepared.
mm.
So that I really took note of that because they were invested in doing the work. I think that's a real hallmark of leading yourself.
Yeah.
Are you going to choose to be invested, or are you going to, put up a wall and say, you know what, we'll make it through this 2 hours and then we're going to move on to the next thing, right? So, so that was one of my observations, was how well prepared they came,
Yeah.
and they were really invested. I would also offer that they learned a lot from each other, which reinforces which reinforces for them individually that they each individually have a lot that they bring to the table. There's a lot
Mm.
of self-value that a lot of valuable ideas that they can bring to each other, and that they can choose what it is that they wanted to use and
Yep.
what it is that they wanted to integrate. Those to me were some of the most tangible takeaways. And then when I had individual coaching conversations with them, we talked about specific scenarios. And let's talk about some of these conversations that we had, some of the techniques. That's when we got a little bit more in, I'd say, tactical
Yeah.
technique, because we'd already set the stage.
Mm. Which is fascinating. So without going into detail of some of those techniques, one of the things that I look at from a self-leadership point of view is thought patterns, but also mindset. And that the leader or the team is a reflection, always will be, of the leader. So as an exceptional leader, you need to be really conscious of the example that you're setting and be very, um, I guess, focus on what that example is that you'd like to see play out in your team, which means you've got to have a pretty healthy mindset and self image. So love to know, in the work that you've not so much done with that group, but maybe in the conversation you have with the individuals, but even other clients, how big a part does the self image and the mindset play in this self leadership component?
The way that we think about ourselves and general mindset is critical, and especially in sales, because in sales, we are the fuel of the organization.
Mm,
Sales teams are the fuel. And if you look at any single organization, every job in that organization exists to a degree because there are sales happening. There is revenue coming in the door. There are products and services being sold. There is profit being generated, which then ideally can be reinvested.
mm,
So sales is a very fun, but also high pressure role as an individual seller, and especially as a leader, because you go from being somebody who's an individual contributor to your results are the reflection of your team's
mm.
effort. Before I lose this thought, I wanted to share this with you, and then I'll get back to your question specifically. I had a leader early in my career that I really, really respected. And this leader had once said to me, people leave a role because the role just isn't a fit for them anymore. And I remember hearing that early in my career. But then I had a little bit of a change of thought pattern. So to your comment around patterns, where our patterns need to be interrupted from time to time. And the interruption of that pattern was more observing. Yes, people will leave a role or a company if that's not a fit, or they don't like what it is that they're seeing in the company, or they don't like their job anymore. But more often than not, they leave a role because it's because of leadership.
Mm.
I see that more often than not, that somebody leaves an organization because of leadership. So I wanted to mention that before I forgot to mention it. But in terms of mindset, I'm a big proponent of pattern busting. I talk about that a lot with my clients. I talk about it in sales. I talk about it in leadership. Being aware of the patterns that serve us,
Mm.
and having a continual awareness of where a pattern can become a rut,
Yeah.
and where we have to make a change. So that's one technique or awareness that I like to bring to my clients. Also, from a sales standpoint, sales optimism and sales responsibility.
Mm.
Those are self leadership traits that I find really, really important. And sales optimism is that belief
Mm.
that you can be successful despite what is happening out in the world. Now, some days that's going to get tested, right? Nothing's perfect. But if you have an underlying sales optimism and you approach your clients and prospects in that way, you are naturally going to generate more opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you are someone who has sales responsibility, I have to give credit for this term because I work with an assessment firm called Objective Management Group, and I use their sales assessment with all of my clients. And one of their findings is sales responsibility. And basically, what sales responsibility says is no matter what's happening out in the world, I believe I'm responsible for my success.
Hmm.
And if I win a deal or I lose a deal, I have to analyze my role in that so that I can either change it or keep doing it.
Mm, brilliant. Which means taking a big look at self.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. We talk about this like it's so easy, right? It's not,
Well,
but
but
you can build the
well,
muscle around it. You can build the muscle
you
and it
can,
becomes easier.
and the thing is, like talking about sales responsibility, there's a lot of organizations that do post-sales loss reviews and call them the
Mm.
post-mortems. But I had a client during the week, and I was doing a leadership workshop with them, and one of the guys was talking about, well, I don't necessarily just do the post-mortem. I do a pre-mortem, which means I do a pre opportunity assessment to try and look at all the things. So to look at my probability without tainting, I guess, my sales optimism, but I do an analysis to see what can go wrong so that I can build strategies to try and mitigate that as much as possible so that when I do a post-mortem, I'm not doing a post-mortem on a loss, I'm doing a post-mortem on a win.
I love that thinking. And that is injecting a dose of healthy skepticism into your work. So
Yeah.
it's balancing out the optimism and the skepticism.
Yeah, but and what he was saying there was, you know what, there'll be some things that happen that ultimately are beyond our control. Customers make decisions based on their own set of criteria, even though they might give us what their criteria is and we fit that criteria. There might be some underlying criteria that they just use as a decision-making mechanism, which means we don't get the deal. And so instead of then blaming them or blaming marketing or blaming my leader or blaming external, we take full responsibility for that because at least we've got control over what steps we then take to try to minimize the opportunity of that happening again. Right. So we learn it and that's not just leadership, it's self-leadership. Because the question there is what part did I play in that? And therefore, what can I do maybe differently to give ourselves the opportunity of getting a different result?
And when a team is participating in that and they see the leader operating in that way, then that team will be more productive. They will create better results because they're following their leader,
Hmm.
because the leader has a level of awareness about how to analyze those deals and bring people along with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it as we say it this is not necessarily rocket science, but it sometimes is more complicated than rocket science because at least rocket science operates according to scientific principles. We're dealing with human beings.
Right, right. I know.
That's it. So if we then take the self-leadership component, and I want to sort of integrate now into sales strategy. So your work you do, obviously working with leaders, doing that round table would have been a great opportunity for them to reflect. What's your experience now or your understanding of people and organizations that can really nail down this self-leadership discipline as to how that now integrates in their ability to build more effective sales strategies? So what I'm trying to do there is what's the linkage between that?
Yes. And interestingly enough, when I work with clients or prospective clients, there are many organizations that are successful in spite of themselves, and they don't have growth or sales strategy.
Yeah, they just got lucky.
I, yeah, and I used to be, I used to be shocked by that. I'm probably still a little bit surprised, but there are a lot of organizations that operate. They operate, but without growth or sales strategy. So if you're one of those organizations, we need to have a conversation about that. Because strategy, when things are going well, it's like, oh, things are great. We don't
Mm,
need to make those investments. But when things are not going well, things get constrained, things get ultra competitive. You
yeah.
don't have that foundation to lean on
Mm,
and to help you guide your team into the future. So the leadership Self-leadership, people leadership, and strategy are all intertwined together. And when I work on sales strategy with teams, I take them through a strategy creation process where they're looking at the next 18 to 24 months of the business. They might have a long-term vision, and they should have a long-term vision, but I'm finding that strategy needs to be formulated a lot more quickly. And you have to be a lot more flexible and adaptable to changing strategy, which is also, I believe, a self-leadership component. If
Yeah.
you are somebody who is flexible and adaptable, you will be much more confident making decisions about your strategy
Yeah.
in environments that require that flexibility and adaptability. So that leadership component becomes critical for designing strategy, for pivoting when you need to, but it also becomes really important. Creating strategy is the fun part. It's the implementation and the accountability of strategy that's the difficult part. And that's where self-leadership and people leadership play a really big role in implementation, creating an environment of ownership and accountability.
And what do you say when you look at an organization that perhaps does the opposite? They have great strategy, they do have a growth plan, but they change it very often. They're almost reactive to the marketplace and they think, wow, we've got to change our strategy because that can create lots of uncertainty within a sales team or within a wider team. So the importance therefore of self-leadership becomes even more critical.
What I would say for an organization that's operating in that way, probably what they don't have is a well thought out solid strategy
Mm,
if they find themselves constantly in a
mm,
state of reactivity. There's always going to be some level of needing to react and pivot,
mm.
but if that is your culture, being reactionary and pivoting and changing, you probably don't have a strategy or a good one because you don't have anything that's guiding you. And therefore, you probably are creating confusion in the
Mm.
marketplace with your clients and prospects. There might be some outliers in there that are successful with that, but probably the vast majority of companies that operate in that way actually don't have a successful strategy that they've created.
Yeah, because a confused buyer never buys.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to know that
Right.
am I buying from an organization who has a clearly defined strategy that at least gives me the impression that they're on a path that they can support me post this sale. So I'm not going to take a risk and place my business in jeopardy.
Exactly, because we are selling confidence and clarity
Mm,
as much as we are selling whatever product or solution set that we sell.
yeah,
And if we are confusing out in the marketplace, if our sales teams are confused out in the marketplace,
yeah,
the expectation of creating results or creating confidence and clarity with clients and prospects won't happen.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I can't sort of wrap this up without mentioning the book that's on your book. Is that a buffet?
Yeah, it's my bookshelf behind
Your
me.
bookshelf on the
Yes.
bookshelf. All right,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Call the Modern Seller. So just give
Yes.
us a quick dissertation in terms of, I guess, the essence of the book, the purpose of the book, and what are some of the key principles within it.
Sure. So the executive summary is that the modern seller is based on my own research and work with my clients as I was uncovering what are the capabilities that an individual seller, a sales leader, or an organization, what do they require to be successful, not only now, but into the future? And typically, when we think about successful sales organizations, or successful seller, we focus on tactics, right?
Mm,
They're great at hunting, they're great at qualifying, and they're great at closing. Like those are all things that we require. But as I was working with my clients and reflecting on my own sales journey, there are some underlying capabilities that are required to help you be successful at those things. It's
hmm
like a self leader being successful as a people leader, right? And so those 5 capabilities are: a modern seller must be agile,
hmm
they must be entrepreneurial, they must be holistic,
hmm
social, and an ambassador.
mm,
And if they can master those capabilities, it will help them to be more successful with the tactical aspects of selling,
Yeah.
with growing their books of business or their territories. And it will also it operates as a field guide for individual sellers or sales leaders.
Nice. I like the fact you've mentioned social, because there's a lot of salespeople that I've met recently that don't like talking to people, and they like just doing things by chat, by email, by text, not face to face, like the
Yes.
old nose to nose, toe to toe sort of selling. Um, so I'm glad some of the old school habits are back front of mind again.
It's interesting because I get asked about that one quite a bit. And, is that about social selling? What is that about? And really, in the end, what it's about is being strategic and intentional about the relationships that you need to be building
Yeah,
in order to be successful with your clients and prospects, and being adaptable to the ways in which our clients and prospects want to communicate with us.
love it, love it.
Yeah.
So, Amy, it's been a fabulous conversation. Time has absolutely flown. Before I ask you one final question, if people wanted to get a hold of you, connect with you, learn more about what you do, particularly also getting hold of your book, The Modern Seller, where's the best place for them to do that?
So, one of the best places to connect with me is on LinkedIn. Please let me know that you heard me on this podcast, and I would welcome a connection there. Secondarily, amyfranko.com. And the book is available in all the formats on Amazon.
Amazon. Perfect. I'll stick those in the show notes. And thanks for connecting with me on LinkedIn overnight, which was cool. Now,
Likewise. Thank you.
awesome. So one final question. There's been a lot of upheaval in the world. A new pope has just been ordained, or is that what they say? Or selected? Um,
Yeah, I don't know the technical term for it, but I did see that in the news today.
yeah, and apparently he's an American, so that's a little bit unusual because it hasn't really happened, I don't think, too many times before. There's also a lot of upheaval in the world right now. So
Mm-hmm.
in uncertain times, if there's one, I guess, overarching piece of advice you'd like to leave people with, either as individual contributors or more importantly, sales leaders, to best navigate the times that we're in, what would that be?
Mm-hmm. What I would offer is that the disruption and the change will always be around us. Sometimes it will feel really, really chaotic. Sometimes it will feel more manageable. It probably just depends on the time of the year and maybe what's happening in your life and in your business. What I would offer is to look inward, to take that time, to invest that time in you, find that white space in your life where you can invest some time in reflecting on the type of self leader that you'd like to be. If you're in a people leadership role, the type of people leader that you want to be, and do the things in your life that you enjoy doing, because time flies. We talk about time flying. Do the things that you enjoy doing, invest in yourself, and that that type of inner work will help you to feel more in control of your life and
Mm,
will help you ultimately be a better leader and be more impactful.
love it. Love it. Great advice to finish off. So, Amy, absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Been a great conversation. Hope you continue to create that magic you are with your clients, and I hope the book continues to sell really well. So, thanks again for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.
All the best. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.